April 16th, 2023. I mean, I only wanted to tip you once, not twice. All right, it's Finance Nation here. And so this is a second reaction video regarding the tipping culture and how it's getting out of control. So basically, just got done watching some more tipping out of that popped up in my feed again. So I decided to touch bases on it again. And I started thinking, oh my goodness, wait a minute. This is where we're potentially, when this guy, he said he didn't want to tip. He doesn't want to be part of the tipping culture. He doesn't want to leave tips. He doesn't want to tip the waiter or the waitress. He doesn't want to tip him anything. He doesn't want to tip, of course, the Starbucks, the barista, the mechanic, the fast food restaurant server, whoever. He doesn't want to be part of it because the employer is giving the opportunity that we're subsidizing the employer. And a few months ago, a while back, because I am a cashier, and so I see what payment methods people pay with at times, and I even see fellow coworkers what they pay with at the self-checkout. And I'm not like being nosy, it's just so happens the way the self-checkout stand is, to have that there, and that where my eyes travel to make sure that the payment processor screen is operating properly, so that there isn't necessarily, I don't want to say it, but a walk off. So with that said, we're at the point where we are subsidizing when we pay our taxes. Are we subsidizing the cashier? Are we subsidizing the maid? Are we subsidizing the tipped person? I mean, cashiers, we're not really, we can be tipped, but it's not really necessarily, there's not a tipping screen that says tip us 1, 5%, 10, 15. And really what they're saying now is they're saying 25. They're starting at 25%, 40%. And you have to put in a custom tip if you want to tip in less than 20% or 25%. But basically, so we're tipping in a way where we could be tipping twice, in a sense, if you go to necessarily a restaurant, because the employer is not paying them to the point to where they are subsidized. And so we're tipping them the initial tip of 25%, 20%, 50%, whatever you're tipping the restaurant worker or the barista, wherever you're the hairdresser, salon person. But I mean, some of them, they do set their own rates. So that's tipping them could be different unless they are an employee of an hourly rate, right? So basically what we have here is this whole phenomenon where it's just like looking at the point where we're tipping the employer or the employee. And it's sort of in a perspective. I mean, one side could be viewed as arrogant, or another side could be viewed as entitled. And I'm not trying to get political on that, but that seems like the two different visions that people have if they're on one side. Oh no, we're tipping the one side will say we're tipping the cashier, we're subsidizing the tipped employee, the waiter, the waitress, the barista, the hair salon employee. We're tipping them, and they only deserve it if they give beyond exceptional service. But because beyond exceptional service is always set at a new standard, because you begin to expect a 10, and you always get a 10, but you don't get that, and then you get that this. I expect, as a cashier, as someone who works in customer service, I expect good customer service from other retail locations, and when I don't get it, it really pisses me off. So to see that level, I mean, they're not sitting there. I don't think people are sitting there going, oh, I'm not going to work really hard to get a good tip. That doesn't make any sense. But are we subsidizing them? And so one point of view is could be that we are subsidizing the tips employee, while the other tips employee say, no, we are subsidizing the employer, and that could be seen as entitled. But I think that's only entitled because I'm possibly one of those people where I'm like, no, you're subsidizing maybe the employer, and basically not to the point where it's like entitlement for more work for because you can always do a different job, but because you're not paid that much, they are on these people. They're on they or they because of the lifestyle they chose to live. I don't have any kids, but maybe they have kids. Maybe they are whatever, and so I just think that, and then sometimes it's not that we're subsidizing their current employer. We could be subsidizing their past employers, you see, if you think about that, because they don't have the savings or the investments, or they got into debt with their past employer. So the only reason why they applied for assistance was because they were in that predicament where now it's not that they couldn't pay for their own living right now, but some of that assistance could be includes debt and stuff like that. So, with that said, it's like that's a second tip if you're subsidizing the tipped worker, and then it's if not, then it's like a second subsidy to the employer when you pay that tax to go towards that's being allocated from the government. When you pay your taxes, that goes to the government, they allocate that to certain subsidies. And so where does it go? I mean, one of the health insurance companies increased their pay rate to $15 an hour because they found out a huge percentage of their work staff was on some form of subsidy. And that was their minimum wage. And then I think Bank of America was like, oh, they're going to increase theirs to $20 a few years ago. $20 an hour is the flat minimum rate for their employees. And that's huge. Now, depending on where you're at in the country, because I mean, obviously, if you're going to be in one of the big expensive states or areas, it's not going to be some really gigantic difference necessarily, but it is going to have that impact on society when they're like, oh, they can pay that. So they probably won't pull it exactly from the top. They're probably going to pull it maybe from the middle to get their median wage up. But it was getting to me. It was like these people they were talking about. I've never been a waiter or waitress, and I've never been reliant on the money from other people, their money to the gifts from other people. I've never been reliant on that. I've never been reliant on that actually getting, on a daily, monthly, weekly basis or anything, a lifestyle where you're like relying on tips in order to make a living. And that the kind of abuse that could come with is extremely ridiculous, I think. And I don't think that people should be subject to that. I think that they should be in the situation where, okay, if they get a tip, they get a tip. But if they go to work, is what I'm trying to say. If they go to work, they go to work. And then when they go to work, if a customer is giving them, sexual harassment or something, but they're reliant on that customer, that, women in particular, I guess, where they would have to give them a tip, where they would not have to, but be in a situation where, like, if they talk back, that could be detrimental to their tip. That's not a lifestyle that you really want to be in, or a position you want to be in, or a financial position you want to be in. So of course you want to have an emergency fund and stuff, right? That's what a lot of the financial advisors say. I'm not one, and that's not financial advice. It's for entertainment purposes only, but still, they all say that. You can go look on YouTube or other places, look it up online. What is an emergency fund a good idea, and what many financial advisors typically say many of them say 3 to 6 months. Susie Orman has said 8 months, and I think she's even said what you're comfortable with. So, like, if you're comfortable for a year or 2 years, Susie Orman has said that it is what makes you financially secure. And so that whole point where it's just like, oh my goodness, like, to be reliant on the subsidy and who's being subsidized. And so that's the question. Is the employer being subsidized, or is the individual being subsidized? You could very well say, no, it's totally the individual that is being subsidized. And I can see why you said that, because it's only been introduced to me as that up until recently, and I was like, oh my goodness. When the money is there to pay the people of the company, then that's why I think that. Does that make sense? So if the money's not there to pay, like, there's a government grant, there was a podcast on Bigger Pockets Money, and this guy, he was working for an employer, and the business was a small business, maybe a new startup, but basically where the employer got subsidized from a grant, basically by the government, to pay a percentage of this guy's salary. So it's like, okay, well, they're going to pay a percentage of the guy's salary. That's nice and dandy and stuff. And so, paying a percentage of his salary on an annual basis, and it was significant. It was a huge percentage of it. But, is that person being subsidized by the government, or is the business being subsidized by the government? Because that has to be renewed year after year up until the company gets profitable enough in order to pay the full salary. And then, are they going to subsidize the wage increases? Are there going to be any wage increases for any of that? Or I think he could have been the owner of the business, but it was subsidizing one of his employees. It could be either or. Either he was the employee or he was the owner of the business, and he was being subsidized as the business owner. But either way it goes, that way it's like, oh, we're going to look at it and say that the business owner is being subsidized in that case because the business is receiving a government grant or something. But that's a bunch of bull. I mean, just because it's backwards in a way. Now think about that. What I'm saying in that situation is this employer has basically the opportunity to basically receive, the employer has the opportunity to receive this whole grant from the government and all this other stuff on the employee's salary. But the other way is like, oh, the government gives grants out in the form of Section 8, food stamps. They give it out in, what else? Medicaid, all this other stuff, right? So they're giving it out, and it's issued in a different way. It's issued in Medicaid is the form of health care, and it's the financial aspect opportunities that are offered with that, but it's health care. All of a sudden, it's seen as a luxury too, and you need to survive in order to live. And so, depending on who you ask, they could see that as like, oh, you're entitled if you don't see healthcare as a luxury in a sense. And then, but, that's another conversation. It's a whole nother video I could actually, just talk about. And probably do some research and get that on there. Let me know if you want me to, if you're actually watching the video this far into the video. And then give me a thumbs up as well if you like what you hear so far, and ask any questions you got, and maybe I'll put out a video about that, but as well. But there's healthcare and there's food, there's charity, there's food banks, there's healthcare charity as well, right? And there is housing charities called homeless shelters in a sense, but I've never really heard of an actual homeless shelter. It's always like a work program, and so there's other programs that I've seen. They were like, programs for, I came across this list. I had been homeless and I came across this list. And there were ones for drug addicts and alcoholics. There were boy shelters. And so whatever programs they had, I didn't qualify for those. But you have these other programs. You have one shelter that was actually not a work program, to my knowledge. It was just like a bed night stay. And I didn't really like that one. You couldn't leave your stuff there during the day. They want you to take everything with you during the day. And I don't even consider it a safe area. So I just was like, I don't like it out here. This is going nowhere fast for me. But there were actually like work programs. There wasn't the solution at any of the ones I was looking for. The one that had one for me, I said, I need to know this. And I talked about this in a previous video. And so I don't want to veer too away from the tipping thing. But so I'm on Social Security disability. And so basically I said, I need to know what it takes to go back to work. What are the income limits? Because I'm on Social Security. But they had a Social Security program where they help people get on Social Security and basically apply, and they're like, if you're in stage 1, you can't even leave the building for the first 30 days, which is absolutely ridiculous. I was like, I'm not going to even last here because that's not conducive. Why would you make people stay because somebody else ruined it for somebody else? That's bull. But anyway, about that. So in a sense, it was like, well, is the subsidy because I hadn't received high enough compensation at my previous employers, because my Social Security disability check was based on my previous income. Had it been high enough, then I would have been elsewhere. And then that's another debate on what Social Security disability is and what it provides. And if you ask one person, they will call it welfare. If you ask another person, they won't call it welfare. I won't call it welfare. I don't call it welfare. And so you can look up Social Security disability videos. There's different people that have different comments on that. It is like a healthcare issue where you're permanently in a situation where you cannot work to the same full capacity that you could previously. And it's detrimental to your health. And so that's what that is. And it's not a full salary to any extent to people that I've known. I've met one lady, she had been a nurse, so she had made like $90,000 a year, and she's sitting there, I'm a cashier at the time. I eventually found out the income limits, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't have gone back to work. But she's telling me she's getting like over $3,200, some $3,000 a month, and I'm like, that's enough not to work. That's enough not to work. And that's enough where I wouldn't have lost my home to foreclosure. So, it's one of those things where you just go, okay. And, I finished my master's degree as a cashier at Kroger. But to be in that situation where like, oh, there was a tip. There was a program where they were like, oh, they'll pay for your master's degree. And that was an organization. I don't think it was the government. And I didn't get in the program in time because Texas government took it over. They were like, oh, it's only high school diploma now. And before, they would do PhDs and master's degrees and stuff, but they won't do that now. So I was like, oh, bummer. So, but it was okay because I paid, and that means I just paid for the whole thing. And, but let's see here. I don't know what else I could think of. But if you can think of anything else regarding double tips or single tips in the economy and what that does, but I just really wanted to touch base on that, how I think that we've gotten to the point where we're subsidizing. Now, when I think that we're subsidizing a human being, I think when they're not doing anything to necessarily help themselves, or they're worsening their situation on purpose. What I mean is, in the state of Texas, and I wish I would have said this earlier because this is 20 minutes in the video. If you've gotten that far, hit a like, thumbs up. Let me know, say in the comments that you've gotten this far, but this is really key, right? If you basically get on food stamps and you're able to save up your money, more than $300, more than $400, once you get to that $300 threshold, I think it's $300 in the state of Texas, because you are on food stamps and you're not teaching yourself to budget and stuff, you're just like, oh, I'm gonna go spend that on a Gucci purse because they're not gonna be eligible for food stamps, right? They're just not gonna be eligible for food stamps if they don't spend that money. Then I think that's when we're starting to subsidize the individual over the organization that they might work for, or when they are doing stuff, when they're taking their stimulus check and they're doing something else with it. And I'm like, and then, are we subsidizing, when it comes to housing? When it comes to housing, and intentionally, in a sense, are we subsidizing the homeowners and the landlords? Or are we subsidizing the tenants? Because if the program, it hasn't really expanded in several years, but had it expanded, there would be, I think rents would be a lot higher. Everyone's like, expand Section 8, and that can be good, definitely, to help people, but it could also be bad if we start expanding it. We subsidize the landlord's rents, and then we're also possibly subsidizing the individual. What I mean by that is the individual goes, oh, well, I'm not going to try to make any additional money. They do that as well. They're not going to try to make any additional money, and not because of the welfare cliff, but possibly because of the welfare cliff. And that's the whole thing where it's like 10 cents. They make 10 cents extra an hour or $1 extra an hour. So that's a 40-hour work week. That's $160 a month. Their rent goes up to $200 to $300. Their food stamps gets cut to like 10% of what it was. Their Medicaid goes away, so their free healthcare goes away. So they want to go back to what they were doing before because they know how to make that work. And their rent isn't subsidized. I mean, they don't have the help to the point they had before. So their $20,000 salary that became $24,000 needed to become $60,000 in order to make up the difference. I mean, it could be really huge, just a 50-cent an hour raise. So when it comes to that, it's just like you've got to have these people be in a position where they can literally take the initiative and jump their salary from $20,000 to $60,000. But what happens is maybe they have a kid and they're now in this luxury life. I don't want to say luxury, but compared to what I have right now, I have a small 1-bedroom, maybe 500 square feet. It's really small. And so they might have a 1,600, 2,000 square foot house, and they could be a single parent of 1 or 2 kids, and then they've got all of these other subsidies. They live by themselves. They don't have a roommate. They're not in the garage. They're not in an extra room or two, sharing a room with their kids in somebody's house. And that's another thing with me. I was like, what I'm doing is I am building wealth. I am investing, saving my money so that when they say, oh, you've got too much in assets, you can no longer be here at this subsidized. I'm at top rent. I'll say it. I wasn't going to say it, but I'll say it. So my salary with my Social Security together grosses, this is before Medicare premiums and taxes and everything else, is about $28,000 this year, starting this year. And that's what it's projected to be, $28,000. So, with that said, I was like, what would I do? And I plan for it every year when I turn in my paperwork, because I have to annualize each year. Am I going to have to go get a roommate? And what that's going to do to my finances. I get 5% cash back. I pay off this one credit card each month, but I get 5% cash back on my electricity bill, and I won't get that 5% back anymore necessarily, so that cuts into my rebates that I get, my coupon rebates, and 5% each month. There are certain credit cards that I don't want to get into the credit card game, but you can look at credit card videos on YouTube. There's all over there, and you can find a credit card that does some really cool stuff. And then I get 5% back on groceries. So the grocery probably would stay the same, but that's huge. And then I get 5% back on the internet. So that's another. So we're talking in the, what is it, 36, we'll say $36, $40 plus an additional $48 a year on that one credit card on 12 months, every 12 months. So, do the math. That could be pretty huge on someone with a low salary. It's a really huge deal on someone with a low salary. If I was making $100,000 a year between my job and Social Security or whatever, then that wouldn't be such a huge deal. And so the subsidy, who's subsidizing my credit card rewards are people who are possibly paying interest and stuff like that. So you're like, oh, are you paying tip twice if you feel like you're subsidizing me? Are you tipping me twice? Are you tipping me in subsidies and then not in taxes, but in credit card interest that you're paying? And so that is something to consider if you feel like you're tipping a cashier, but you might not even be anywhere in the South. So, United States of America, that is. So anyway, but what else? But I was just like, oh my goodness, this whole thing about tipping. And this guy, he was so, I don't want to say evil, but, if you go to a restaurant and you get service for a good 30 minutes or an hour from someone, seriously, and you do not tip them, and that you're in a state where they're making $2 to $3 an hour, that is very ugly. It is very evil, and it's very wrong. They are not there to tip part of their bill out to their coworkers. And some restaurants, it could be tip pulling, it could be called tip sharing, and there's some other terms that I found out. But basically, if you have a $40 bill and they might have to tip 1, 5, 10% of that bill to the rest of the staff. And so if you tip $5, then they could be left sometimes in some cases a little less $1. If you tipped $4, they might not have a tip from you. And if you don't tip at all, They just paid money to work for you. And it's declared in their system. That is ugly. It is evil. It is wrong for them, this restaurant, to do that. But for you to sit there and go, if you hired a maid, if you hired a cook, you would pay them. And you're not even paying someone that's providing like a personal shopper to you. I don't know how to say that, but it was sort of like that to me. I was like, what's the personal shopper? I was like, Instacart and stuff, they might make, much more, but that's like a personal shopper, and they deliver groceries to your house, ship, and others, is DoorDash your personal shopper, your own personal delivery driver. You can see Uber Eats, at least by name. I saw someone, I had a special once, and I didn't even know. I was just tipping because I knew it was such a big deal to them anyway, but I had a special, and the app was already on my new phone. It was already downloaded, and I was like, so I just signed up, and they sent me an email, and they were like, you get this. So I was like, oh, I'll just add a tip. But they had delivery charges. I mean, it was just like, they were like free $10 meal. So I ordered a $7 meal. The $7 was free, but there was like $8 in shipping fees. Some of that the delivery driver is getting, and then in taxes. So I was like spending more than what the actual $10 was. It was just a cheese pizza, and I didn't even like cheese pizza. I just was just like, oh, I'll just order this. And then I put it on a little bit of a tip, and was like, okay. And then I see the driving on the app, and where this girl is driving from, and I'm like, oh, I gotta tip her more, not even realizing that she already received some shipping delivery per mile fees or whatever. But I find out now there was this huge video on the internet where they're showing no tip, no trip, right? And there's like bags and bags full of delivery orders that are not being delivered or picked up because the person won't tip. But I think there's more to it than that. Because of what I've heard, it has to deal with how far you live from the restaurant, and if it's like, what kind of order is involved. So for like Instacart, what this one guy did was, I think, evil. They didn't have an elevator. He ordered like 24 packs of water. And so they only might get like $7 per trip. And so he ordered all of this water, and this woman had to carry it up all of these stairs, and she had to go back down to her car and carry it up all these stairs. And I'm like, he did that on purpose.